Welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire.
What does asbestos management mean to you?
I used to really struggle with the asbestos management at my site, but now it's a breeze.
It used to be really expensive. I was paying loads, but now I've got my asbestos power team in place. It's so much easier.
Asbestos can be a pain in the arse if not handled right.
We had to stop the job because asbestos was discovered. Now we don't have that problem.
Asbestos management is easier than you think. Asbestos management. Be proactive, not reactive. Think about asbestos first, not last.
And now your hosts, best-selling authors and asbestos experts, Ian Stone and Neil Munro.
Hi, welcome to the Asbestos Knowledge Empire. I'm Ian Stone.
And I'm Neil Munro.
So today we're going to be talking about material assessments and priority risk assessments. We're going to go through what the differences are, what they actually mean, and what they mean to you and how they can help you.
Yeah, so we've got two types of assessment, material risk assessment and a priority risk assessment. The two assessments put together will give you a total risk, so it'll give you information on how best to manage that asbestos product within your property.
So first off, we're going to look at material assessments. And the material risk assessment, what that actually does is it looks at the risk of the asbestos product releasing asbestos fibre. So this is when the asbestos surveyors are on site. This is the assessment that the surveyors carry out on behalf of you and as part of their survey, like I say, looking at what the risk is of those particular products releasing asbestos fibre.
Okay, so the assessment is broken down into a number of categories, and it looks at the product type, the extent of damage to that material, the surface treatment, and what asbestos type or asbestos fibre has been identified within that product. Now, these are all given scores, and we'll just take you through them now. So first of all, product type. So that is a score of 1, 2, and 3. And we'll give you some examples on the different products that fall into the different scores. So we've got a score of 1, and to give you some examples of those types of materials, they would be.
So yeah, for a 1, you've got plastics, resins, mastics, felts, floor tiles. So generally materials where the asbestos is well bound within the matrix of the material.
Yeah, asbestos cement, which is quite a common asbestos product in this country, and that would be a score of 1. So these are kind of the lowest risk products would fall into a score of 1.
Yeah, and then we've got score of 2, and that kind of covers asbestos insulating board, mill boards, textiles, gaskets, ropes, paper, those kind of things. So we've gone up the kind of the risk category as such. That's why it's got an extra point.
Yeah. So low density insulation boards, that type of material. So number 3, what would score a 3? So it's gone up, again, the risk factor. Some examples of those would be sort of thermal insulation, so pipe insulation, boiler insulation, sprayed coatings, loose asbestos fibre, or asbestos that's been put in loose to mattresses and packing. So yeah, quite high risk materials score a number 3.
So that's the first section completed of what forms part of the material risk assessment. The next one down on the list is the damage extent. So it would score 0 if the material is in a good condition, there's no visible damage, it's literally kind of brand spanking new as such. It looks in a really good condition. You can't see anything wrong with it whatsoever.
And then we've got low damage, which would score a 1. And so when we're looking at low damage, we're sort of looking for any minor imperfections within the product. So scratches to the surface, or maybe just a small broken edge or a nick out of a tile. That would be low damage and would score a number 1.
So then moving on, we go to number 2. So it gets a score of 2 is a medium damaged material. And that can have several areas where there's damage. It could be loose asbestos fibres. It could be significant breakage of that material. So, I don't know, sheets that are cracked and got really big raw sections on there.
Yeah, or a hole within a board or something like that would be medium damage. And then obviously we get to number 3, which is high damage. So high damage is really sort of described as significant major breakage to the material, or even sort of debris would be a score of 3. So yeah, really sort of highly damaged, degraded material would score a 3.
Yeah, and then we're on to surface treatment, the next category on the list. So a 0 for this category would be reinforced plastics, resins, vinyl tiles. So again, back to the very dense materials which really do bind the asbestos fibres within itself.
Yeah, so when we're looking at surface treatment, so it's the actual coating or how the outer surface of the material.
What it's mixed with, really, what the kind of finishes of it.
As Ian said, the zero is composite material, so it's self-sealed. So the secondary material that the asbestos has been added to is actually encapsulating the asbestos fibre within itself, and that would be the zero. And then we obviously go up to number 1, and a score of 1 for a surface treatment. This is a treatment to sort of the high-risk materials which have been enclosed. So to give you an example, if pipe insulation, to score it a 1 surface treatment, it would have to be completely enclosed. So that may be with a secondary protection, and it could be clad with aluminium or had a specialist coating that applied to it, which would give it a bit of a mechanical protection to that. Or it could be something along the lines of encapsulated asbestos insulating board, which has had the exposed face sealed. Also, what would be classed as a 1 would be cement sheets. So cement sheets, again, they're not a composite material, however, they are a hard matrix. And asbestos cement sheets score 1 regardless of whether they're painted or not.
Yep, and then what would score number 2 would be unsealed asbestos insulating board or encapsulated laggings and sprays. So again, it's moving up that risk category of the risk of the material to release asbestos fibre.
Yeah. Number 3 would be unsealed lagging or spray coating, so the high risk unsealed items. So surface treatment is probably the hardest one to really categorise and determine from a survey point of view. The other categories are pretty straightforward and self-explanatory.
They're quite black and white, the other categories.
Yeah.
The surface treatment one is down to the individual surveyor's experience and their knowledge of those types of materials and what they should be looking like and what the finish should be like on them.
Yeah, because the actual product type does affect the surface treatment. And to give you an example, was the asbestos cement sheets. If you painted those sheets, it doesn't really give it any additional protection from releasing the fibre. However, the difference between painting some asbestos insulation and enclosing it within aluminium, there's obviously a big difference there in the actual surface treatment. So that's why it is quite varying on the different products.
And then finally, for the risk category, we've got the asbestos type. So chrysotile white asbestos scores a 1. All other amphiboles, so amosite brown asbestos plus all of the lesser mined asbestos types score a 2. And chrysidolite blue asbestos scores a 3 in that category.
Yeah, so this is a bit of an area where somebody asked me once, why do the asbestos types have a different score when they're all treated the same? I think that there's a couple of reasons for that. Previous to the current set of regulations, the asbestos fibre types were classed in as different, so there was different sort of control and action levels considered to chrysotile and the amphiboles. And additionally to that, I think the reason that they're classed as that is because chrysidolite was used in quite a lot of the early asbestos products. So if you've got a product with chrysidolite in it, chances are it's probably an older product, and therefore there may be a risk of that being more degraded than an older product. So that's why it could score a higher score.
Once you've got those scores, you put them all together, and then it gives the potential to release asbestos fibre. So that goes from very low to medium and finally to high. So that's essentially the material risk assessment. And like I said at the beginning, it's all about the risk of the material releasing asbestos fibre. And once you've added those categories, the scores, it then gives you that potential in those kind of easier to understand elements.
Yeah. Obviously, if the material doesn't contain asbestos, then it's therefore not asbestos and it has no potential to release asbestos fibre. So if you do get, sometimes companies produce the algorithm based on the actual material within an asbestos survey report and record it as non-asbestos, but you still get the actual material risk assessment. But obviously, if it hasn't got any asbestos in there, then you don't need to worry about that. So when you've got this information, so material risk assessment gives you information on how easily or how readily that asbestos material will release asbestos fibre. What you then need to look at is, well, what's the risk of somebody coming into contact with that asbestos product within your property? And that's where we look at priority risk assessments. And this is an algorithm as well. Again, similar fashion where it's broken down into the different categories, and the different categories are scored of 0 to 3. And we'll just take you through those now.
Now, within some of these categories, they've got kind of subcategories as well, just to make it nice and confusing for everyone. We'll talk you through them as we go. Similar kind of manner to what we just did. So the first one is the normal occupants activity, the main type of activity in that area. And then also, we can also score a secondary activity as well within that one score area.
Yeah. And the reason for that is, to give you an example, you may have a location which is used for different activities. So if you take, for instance, a school hall, where in the day it's hardly ever used other than for assemblies, but in the evenings it's used to have karate in there. So
five-a-side football.
Or five-a-side or basketball, etc. like that. So the activities are completely different at different times of the day. Therefore, you'd use the normal and the secondary activity to give you an overall risk.
Just on that, so the material risk assessments, like I said, they're produced by the surveyor. Now, the asbestos surveyor can help and assist the client, the duty holder, with the priority assessments. However, the surveyor can only see it from a snapshot at that point, and they can make an educated guess on what that building's used for, what the room's used for, and what some of these other things we're going to run through are likely to be. However, it's only the duty holder and the people who really do know that building inside and out that fully understand it. And therefore, it's really imperative to make sure that you check these, that your surveyor runs through these with you, just so that it's 100% straight. And the fact that if they've scored it for something, it actually reflects what it's actually being used for.
So to give you some examples then, so if you're looking at the normal occupancy or secondary activities within the area, it scores of 0 to 3. So 0 would be an area which is rarely used and there's rare disturbance activity within that location. To give you an example of that, so it could be a disused cupboard or a storeroom which isn't used very often, something like that. So a room which is kind of never really occupied during the day, or if it at all within the week, something like that.
Somebody pops into that area once in a blue moon. Next on the list is low disturbance. So again, it's kind of a low disturbance area. So that could be, I don't know, a boiler room where somebody goes in once a month to check the readings off of the boiler, that kind of activity.
Yeah. And then 2 would be periodic disturbance activity. So this is where you've got a location which is used daily, lots of activity go on there. There's a lot of movement around. It could be industrial vehicle activities. So yeah, quite a busy period within that area.
Yeah, and then finally in the category, you've got high levels of disturbance. So that could be a main thoroughfare through a building where it's literally constantly in use.
Yeah, doors opening and stuff like that. Yes, that's the 3 categories in there.
Next, we're going to look at the likelihood of disturbance. Like I said earlier, the material is for the risk of the fibre releasing the asbestos, but the likelihood of disturbance is based on location. So 0 would score outdoors because the likelihood of that outdoors being disturbed is a lot lower. And then it goes up through 1, 2 and 3, large rooms and really ventilated areas.
For a score of 2, you've got rooms up to 100 square metres, and then you've got 3 for confined spaces. So they're all pretty much self-explanatory on the descriptions of those. So that's a location. Next, you've got accessibility. So how likely or how easy is it to get close to that asbestos material? So a 0, it's unusually or inaccessible and unlikely to be disturbed.
A 1, next one up, is occasionally likely to be disturbed. 2 is easily disturbed and 3 is routinely disturbed. So again, you can see that the more it's going to get disturbed, the more of a score it's going to carry with it.
And then under likelihood of disturbance, we're then looking at the extent or amount of asbestos material. A 0 is something very small. And that might be like a little gasket or a string or something like that. Then you've got a score of 1, which is 10 square metres to greater than 10 square metres. 2 is 10 to 50. And then 3 is anything above 50 square metres or linear metres.
So again, pretty self-explanatory. More, and the more size, then the more of a score it carries with it.
Yeah. And this is all about putting together how easily somebody in your property is going to come into contact or disturb asbestos. As Ian said, the higher the score is more likely for you to come into contact with that.
So on that, the next category is human exposure potential. So the first part of that is the number of occupants that are likely to be exposed. So again, it goes from 0 to 3. A 0 is none. If there's no potential for humans to be exposed, then it's going to carry a 0. A 1 score would be a 1 to 3 people. A 2 would be a 4 to 10. And a 3 score is over 10 occupants within that area carrying the exposure.
Next, we've got frequency of use of the area. So how much time is spent within that location. So 0 is infrequent, a 1 is monthly, 2 is weekly, and a 3 is daily.
So again, the more you're going to occupy an area, the higher the score. And then we're into time spent. So less than 1 hour would score a 0. 1 to 3 hours would score a 1. 3 to 6 hours would score a 2. And over 6 hours scores a 3.
Okay, so the next one we're going to look at the next category, which is maintenance activities. And that's broken down into 2. So the type of maintenance activities within that location. So when you're looking at this section, you need to think about what is it from a maintenance point of view that you actually have to carry out within the location where the asbestos is. And if you look at the scoring criteria, you've got, again, 0 to 3. A 0 would be minor disturbance, for example, possibility of contact when gaining access. So if you're walking into the room where the asbestos is, and that's the only time that you could come into contact with that material, then you would score it as a 0. You've then got 1, which is low disturbance. So this is an example. This would be changing light bulbs in asbestos insulating board ceiling. Okay, so you're not actually coming into physical contact with the asbestos, but obviously it's in and around the area where you're working. Then you've got 2, which is medium disturbance. So this could be lifting 1 or 2 asbestos insulating board ceiling tiles to access a valve. And then high is high levels of disturbance, removing a number of asbestos boards and replacing with a valve or recabling. So they're the sort of type of scores and activities you got to look at, and you got to sort of presume and think about potential maintenance activities that may come into play in and around those asbestos materials.
And this is one of the areas where the asbestos surveyor can make a good educated guess, but then this is like the real area that you need to be looking at and making sure that they have got the full knowledge of how that area is going to be used, how much maintenance goes on there. And only, like I say, the duty holder or the caretaker or whoever's got knowledge of that property can really only fully answer themselves. But finally, within that category, we've got the frequency of maintenance as well. So in there, we would score 1 if the asbestos is unlikely to be disturbed for maintenance, a 2 if it's once per year, a 3 if it's more than once per year.
Yeah, so that's basically the priority risk assessment. And as I said, combine those 2 assessments together, give you an overall total risk of their exposure to asbestos fibre. And that should help you then decide what you need to do with the materials, whether you need to remediate, remove, or if you can just manage it in situ. And then that can lead on to what you need to do for your asbestos management plan. Okay, so I hope you found that useful. And if you do need any assistance with that, come and join us at Asbestos Knowledge Empire Community on Facebook. So that's it for now. Remember, asbestos first, not last.